All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're looking at a place that honestly sounds like a villain's lair from a spy movie, but I promise you, it is 100% real. We're unpacking the 70-year secret of a tiny, incredibly restricted island right off the US coast. Get ready, because the true story of what went down at this heavily guarded facility, it's way stranger and honestly a lot more dangerous than any fiction. We're going to explore that super thin, blurry line between a logical military project and, well, an absolute public health nightmare.
100. That is exactly how many miles this little tear-shaped patch of land sits from New York City. Just 100 miles from one of the most densely populated places on the planet, right there on the American coastline. It's called Plum Island. Now, if you look at official maps, it's labeled as this nice, peaceful wildlife refuge, right? But if you were to actually take a boat and try sailing within a few hundred yards of its shore, you'd instantly find yourself face-to-face with heavily armed federal guards on patrol boats. I mean, this place is absolutely off limits.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this right here is what we're calling the proximity paradox. It's wild. On one hand, you have the Hamptons, the multi-million-dollar mansions, pristine beaches, literally the ultimate playground for the ultra-wealthy. But right next door, just a short hop across the water, sits Plum Island. For exactly 70 years, the US government kept this island under total lock and key. They denied journalists, blacked out public records, and completely hid whatever was going on inside their most restricted zone, Building 257. The terrifying irony here is that they placed some of the most infectious, weaponized diseases on Earth literally right next to the most densely populated corridor in America. So, what exactly were they hiding right next to the Hamptons? Well, for decades, the official story they fed the public was, super mundane. They said, oh, it's just a government farm, just a simple Department of Agriculture lab studying sick cows and making vaccines. Nothing to see here, right? Actually, scratch that. When you finally peel back the redactions and look at the declassified reality, this was absolutely not just a farm. It was a literal biological countdown sitting right in America's backyard. To really grasp the sheer scale of this whole operation, we've got to rewind to 1954. The Cold War is freezing over, and the US Army quietly hands this old coastal fortress on Plum Island over to the Department of Agriculture to set up the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. Talk about hiding a threat in plain sight. For the longest time, the government swore the work here was purely defensive. But then, jump forward to 1993, and investigative journalists finally unearthed these highly classified files that proved a much, much darker truth. From day one until 1969, Plum Island was actually a core pillar of America's offensive biological weapons program. They weren't just figuring out how to cure diseases, they were actively weaponizing them. The absolute key here is understanding what they were actually cooking up in those labs. It's a military strategy known as anti-animal biological warfare. You see, during the Cold War, the US military wasn't just terrified of a nuclear bomb, they were terrified of an economic one. The idea is to use highly contagious animal diseases tactically, secretly wiping out an enemy's livestock. Think about it. You destroy the livestock, you collapse their food supply, and if the food supply drops, the entire economy collapses in a matter of months. It is a silent, completely devastating killer. But why on earth put this apocalyptic research on a tiny island near major cities? Well, it comes down to the psychology of the natural moat. Federal law actually made it strictly illegal to study the world's most contagious animal diseases on the American mainland. It was just deemed way too dangerous. So, the government put all their chips on the ocean around Plum Island. The absolute bedrock of their entire safety plan was this assumption that if a deadly virus ever did escape the lab, the geographic isolation, this massive ocean barrier, would stop the pathogen from ever reaching the mainland. But what happens when that natural moat is actually put to the test? Let's jump into the 1970s. By this point, the facility is getting pretty old, it's porous, and the structural integrity is basically starting to crumble. And right around that exact same time, a sudden cluster of kids in nearby Old Lyme, Connecticut, developed these super mysterious arthritic symptoms. Doctors were totally baffled. This ended up being the official discovery of Lyme disease. And because Old Lyme is just a short trip across the water from the facility, it sparked this incredibly famous, persistent local legend. Did Lyme disease actually escape from Plum Island? Now here's where it gets super interesting, because we have to separate fact from fiction, even though the facts are still completely unsettling. Mainstream science and the Department of Homeland Security strongly deny the leak theory. Actually, the Lyme bacteria has been found in centuries-old DNA, so that pretty much debunks the idea that the island invented the disease. However, and this is a massive however, declassified memos reveal that scientists did in fact breed hundreds of thousands of deer ticks inside Building 257. Yeah, hundreds of thousands. They were using them for highly classified African swine fever experiments. So even if the Lyme rumor is mostly a myth, the reality that they were breeding massive colonies of infected ticks in a decaying facility for biowarfare experiments, that is a verified, totally terrifying fact. And this brilliantly illustrates that the fears of a containment breach, they weren't just local paranoia. Check out this quote from an official declassified report. The virus was accidentally released. So yeah, the tick theory might be debated, but what went down inside this lab in 1978 is undeniable public record. The absolute worst-case scenario, the exact nightmare they built that ocean moat to prevent, actually happened. The aging containment barriers completely failed.
In 1978, the incredibly contagious foot-and-mouth virus leaked out of the lab and right into the island's outside environment. We're talking about one of the most infectious, economically devastating animal pathogens on the entire planet. Naturally, the government panicked. To keep this virus from crossing that ocean moat and absolutely decimating the American mainland's food supply, they had to take the most extreme measure you can imagine. Every single animal on Plum Island was systematically slaughtered. The whole idea of a ticking time bomb wasn't a secret anymore. It was a glaring, flashing warning sign.
Fast forward to today, and the consequences of that ticking time bomb have finally caught up with reality. Maintaining an aging biological fortress right next to the most densely populated corridor in America just became an existential risk the government could no longer stomach. So, after 70 years of absolute classification and airtight security, the US government is officially decommissioning the Plum Island facility. The island is actually slated to potentially become a peaceful nature reserve, kind of just leaving all that dark, secretive history behind.
But here's the thing. These incredibly dangerous pathogens aren't just disappearing. They have to go somewhere. So we're moving from an island in New York, protected by its natural ocean moat, straight to Manhattan, Kansas. All of those deadly pathogens, the crazy strains of African swine fever, the highly contagious foot and mouth samples, they're all being packed up and flown to a brand new, multi-billion-dollar facility. And here is the absolute critical difference you need to take away from this. This new National Bio and Agro Defense Facility is located directly in the absolute dead center of the American mainland.
Which brings us to a really profound dilemma. At Plum Island, they completely relied on the ocean to save us when that 1978 breach happened. Out in Kansas, right in the absolute heart of America's cattle country, there is no ocean to stop a breach if those heavily fortified walls ever happen to fail. Is keeping these labs active really worth the catastrophic risk to our food supply? Or should some of these secrets and these pathogens have just stayed buried forever? It's a massive question, balancing cutting-edge scientific defense against catastrophic public health nightmares. Honestly, think about what you would decide if you were the one making the call. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helped you structure your understanding of this wild piece of history, and I'll catch you next time.